The galaxy was burning, not with fire but with chaos. Countless star systems were caught in a war that had no mercy, no rules, and no end in sight. Millions of ships clashed in the blackness of space, leaving trails of destruction like scars across the stars. Entire planets had fallen under siege, civilizations crumbling beneath alien warlords who only knew conquest and power. And in the midst of this chaos, one question echoed through every command center, every council hall, and every fleet. What would happen if the humans joined? Admiral Kalen, a seasoned leader of the Andari fleet, stood on the bridge of his flagship. His gray-clawed hands rested on the railing as he stared at the holographic map of the warfront. Red blips marked enemy positions. Blue blips marked Allied forces. But one type of ship, the humans' massive battleships, was not there. Not yet. And that was the only thing keeping him awake at night. "They say their ships can crush fleets like insects," muttered Lyra, Kalen's young aide, her voice trembling slightly as she hovered beside him. Her wings fluttered nervously. "Is it true, Admiral?" Kalen didn't answer immediately. He only stared at the map, thinking about the stories he had read, the accounts whispered among commanders, the terrifying legends of human courage and fury. "Not just true, Lyra," he said finally, his voice low and grim. "It is far worse than you can imagine. Humans do not fight like we do. They fight differently, with firepower that can destroy a dozen fleets in hours. But that is not all. They fight with a kind of honor that makes them unpredictable. They do not spare anyone, friends, enemies, or innocents, if it stands in the way of their mission." Lyra swallowed hard. "But why would they even join? They have always stayed out of our wars." Kalen shook his head. "They do not care for politics, for treaties, for alliances. They only fight when they believe something is worth protecting, or when someone threatens them. That is why, if they enter this war, there is no predicting the outcome. The entire galaxy could suffer. Entire civilizations could vanish overnight." Silence filled the bridge for a moment. Only the hum of the ship's engines and the blinking lights of the control panels broke the quiet. Kalen looked at the distant stars, each one a home, a life, a dream. "If the humans join," he whispered almost to himself, "it won't just be a war. It will be annihilation, and no one will survive, not the enemies, not the allies, not even us." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "So what do we do?" Kalen's gaze returned to the holographic map. He could almost imagine the humans' ships jumping from hyperspace into the heart of the conflict. Their engines would roar, their weapons would blaze, and their enemies would fall. And yet the collateral damage, the innocent lives lost, it would be catastrophic. "We do everything we can," he said firmly. "We warn them. We try to keep them away. We sacrifice whatever we must, for the sake of everything. We cannot let the humans fight in this war." Lyra nodded, understanding the weight of his words. But even she felt the chill in her chest, the terrible knowledge that no matter what they tried, the humans might appear anyway. Somewhere, in the darkness between the stars, the humans were already moving, unaware of the galaxy's desperate plea. Kalen clenched his fists. "I've faced countless enemies," he said quietly, "but I have never feared anyone like I fear them. And I never thought I would pray to the stars, to pray that we never meet them on the battlefield." As the stars shimmered beyond the ship's windows, the warning spread quietly across the command channels. "For the sake of the galaxy, keep the human battleships out of the war." The words were simple, but their meaning was heavy. Every commander, every fleet, every civilization understood the truth behind them. If the humans joined, nothing would ever be the same. And in that realization, fear and hope coexisted. Fear of what humans could destroy. Hope that somehow they would stay away. Somewhere in the void, the humans were moving, unaware of the galaxy's trembling. And the galaxy held its breath. Far beyond the war-torn systems, in the cold and endless black of space, a new presence emerged. The humans had arrived. From hyperspace, their massive battleships appeared like silver mountains, shining under the pale light of distant stars. Engines roared with a deep, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the void itself. Even from light years away, the energy signatures of the fleet were unmistakable. The humans were here, and the galaxy could feel it. Captain Marcus stood on the bridge of the Valiant, the flagship of the human fleet. His hands rested on the console, steady but tense. He surveyed the star systems ahead. "Status report," he said. Lieutenant Arya, his second in command, leaned forward. "All clear, Captain. Civilians in this sector have been evacuated. No enemy ships detected. Yet Marcus nodded. Good, remember we are not here to fight. We're patrolling, keeping the peace where we can. The war is not ours, but space was never simple. Within hours of arrival, enemy scouts detected the human ships. A rogue warlord's fleet, aggressive and desperate, struck first. The humans did not hesitate. They responded with precision and overwhelming force. In moments, the rogue fleet was obliterated, torn into glowing fragments that drifted silently into the void. The news traveled faster than light. Across the galaxy, Admiral Kalen received the reports in disbelief. They've already engaged? Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. But we asked them to stay out of the war. Kalen's eyes darkened. They are humans, he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. They fight when others attack. They protect when others are in danger. They are not part of this war. But now they are, and it is already too late to stop them. On the human fleet, civilians watched the destruction in awe and fear. Families who had fled from besieged planets stared at the glowing debris of enemy ships, unsure whether to be grateful or terrified. Marcus understood their fear. He understood the responsibility that came with the human's power. One wrong move, one careless strike, and countless lives could be lost. Captain, Arya said softly, they're not just powerful. They're precise. They spared the civilians on that planet. They could have destroyed everything. Marcus's jaw tightened. That is the difference between us and the others. We do not destroy for conquest. We destroy to protect. But the galaxy did not understand. Across countless star systems, panic spread like wildfire. Alien fleets scrambled, civilians fled, and rumors of the human battleships might filled every corridor of every capital. If they continue like this, Lyra said fearfully to Kalen, they could end the war, and maybe the galaxy itself. Kalen clenched his fists. That is why we must act, he said, his voice heavy with both dread and determination. We cannot control them. We cannot command them. All we can do is try to guide them away, to protect what we can before it is too late. In the distance, the human fleet moved with deliberate calm. Their battleships were terrifying in scale, yet their actions carried restraint. They destroyed the attackers but left untouched the civilians and the cities caught in the crossfire. Their presence was a paradox, frightening in power yet inspiring in purpose. Somewhere, deep in the core of the galaxy, Kalen whispered a prayer to stars older than time itself. Please, for the sake of everything, keep them from entering the heart of this war. Marcus did not hear the prayer. He did not know the galaxy trembled at his fleet's arrival. He only knew one truth. Humans were not meant to fight for glory or conquest. They fought because life, in all its forms, deserved to survive. And yet the universe around them was fragile, trembling on the edge of catastrophe. The humans had arrived, and already the galaxy was holding its breath. The Interstellar Council convened in an enormous chamber that floated above the capital planet of Sirion. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered, their forms strange and varied, some with wings, some with claws, some with shifting shapes that glimmered like liquid metal. Yet all of them shared one expression, fear of the humans. Admiral Kalen entered the chamber, his heavy steps echoing against the polished floor. Lyra followed closely, her wings folded tightly behind her. Every eye turned toward them. They had called this emergency meeting after receiving the latest reports of the human fleet's engagement in the Nabara sector. The humans are already fighting, a gray-scaled envoy hissed, his voice sharp and trembling. Their battleships obliterated our forward scouts. Entire fleets vanished in moments. They could destroy all of us if they choose. A winged diplomat raised his voice. And that is exactly the danger. They do not understand diplomacy. They do not follow alliances. They only know victory and power. If they fight, nothing will be safe. Entire cities, entire worlds could vanish in their wake. We cannot allow them into this war. Kalen stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. You all speak as if the humans are monsters. They are not. They fight differently, yes. They are powerful, yes. But they fight to protect life, not to conquer. That is why they are so dangerous. They cannot be reasoned with in the ways we are used to. If we fail to guide them, if we fail to contain them, they will change the war in ways none of us can predict, the council murmured. Some nodded, some shook their heads, and others simply looked away. Overwhelmed by the reality of Kalen's words, Lyra whispered to him, her voice shaking. How do you stop something that doesn't listen to reason? Kalen's gaze hardened. You cannot. Not with words. Not with threats. Not with diplomacy. You can only protect the innocent, evacuate the vulnerable, and, if necessary, sacrifice yourself to keep the humans away from the heart of the conflict. That is the truth. That is our only hope. An older envoy, a creature covered in scales and ridges, slammed his clawed hand against the council table. Sacrifice? You speak of sacrifice as if it will save us. The humans are unstoppable. Why not surrender to them now and hope they spare our worlds? Kalen shook his head slowly. Because surrender is not living. Because there is a difference between fear and responsibility. Humans fight for life, yes, but they also fight for hope. And hope is something the galaxy cannot lose, not now, not ever. A moment of silence followed. Then a winged diplomat finally spoke, softer this time. So, what do we do? Kalen turned to face the council, his eyes scanning each species, each expression, each flicker of doubt and fear. We do what we can. We warn them. We guide them. We create safe paths and decoys, and if necessary, we place ourselves in their path to protect billions of lives. For the sake of everything, we must keep the humans out of the war until the war itself is ready to survive them. The council chamber grew quiet. Even the most skeptical representatives realized the weight of his words. No treaties, no fleets, no strategies could contain what was coming. The humans were moving, unstoppable and unknowable, and yet in that quiet a strange sense of hope lingered. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone could channel their fury for life, not death. Lyra looked at Kalen, awe and fear mixing in her eyes. You really think we can keep them away? Kalen's jaw tightened. We must, or everything we know will burn. The galaxy is fragile, Lyra, and humans. Humans are power unlike anything it has ever seen. Outside, the stars glittered cold and distant. Somewhere in that blackness, the human fleet moved, unaware of the fragile web of diplomacy, sacrifice, and fear that stretched across the galaxy. And as the council debated and planned, one truth remained. The war would never be the same as long as the humans were involved. Kalen clenched his fists. We will do everything to protect life, even if it costs us everything. The Nabara system glimmered under the light of 3 distant suns, a beautiful cluster of planets and moons that had once been a place of peace. Now it was a battlefield. Ships from various alien factions swarmed the system, their weapons ready, their intent clear, domination at any cost. But far above the planets, a new presence loomed, humans. The flagship of the human fleet, the Valiant, hovered silently, engines glowing faintly. Captain Marcus stood on the bridge, scanning the chaotic system. Civilians had been evacuated, but enemy ships still pressed forward, threatening the fragile worlds. Marcus's jaw tightened. Stay calm, crew. Engage only if necessary. Protect life. Nothing else matters. Lieutenant Arya nodded, her eyes sharp. Sir, the enemy is advancing. They're massing near the southern moons. If they strike, it could destroy the evacuation fleet. Marcus looked out at the growing storm of enemy warships. He knew what they were capable of. He also knew what the humans could do. A single salvo from a human battleship could annihilate dozens of enemy vessels in moments, yet they were careful, precise. They destroyed what needed to be destroyed, sparing what could be spared. But even so, the destruction was terrifying. Admiral Kalen watched from a nearby fleet, his communication feed active. Humans, he whispered to himself. I wish we could turn them back. But it is too late. And even now they fight with honor. A human envoy hailed Kalen's fleet. We mean no harm. Stand down and allow the civilians to evacuate. We are not here to fight you, but war is never simple. Panic and fear surged through the alien commanders. A misjudged attack from one faction sent a salvo racing toward the Valiant. The humans responded instantly. The enemy ships exploded, bright fireballs scattering into the void. Dozens of warships built for conquest were gone in the blink of an eye. Kalen's eyes widened. His claws clenched around the railing of his observation platform. This is exactly why they must be kept out. Even with mercy, even with restraint. They are unstoppable in a firefight. Lyra's wings quivered as she watched the scene unfold. But they saved the evacuation fleet. They didn't touch a single civilian ship. Kalen's voice was heavy with awe and fear. Yes, and that is what makes them dangerous. They fight for life, but their power is beyond comprehension. Every time they strike, worlds tremble. Every time they fire, countless lives hang in the balance. We can only hope to guide them, not control them. The humans moved systematically, clearing enemy positions while leaving the planets unharmed. They were terrifying in their precision, but their purpose was clear: defend the innocent, neutralize the threat, and leave life intact wherever possible. The alien commanders could not ignore it. Even their worst fears were tempered by the humans' strange sense of honor. Kalen turned to his fleet. Evacuate what you can. Protect what you must, and pray. Pray that they do not enter the main war. If the humans fully engage, nothing will survive, not our fleets, not the enemy, not the civilians we swore to protect. Lyra shivered. How can anyone stop them, Admiral? Kalen's eyes were fixed on the battle raging across the system. You don't stop humans. You survive them, and you hope that their strength is guided by wisdom. Above the Nibbara system, the human fleet finished their engagement. Smoke rose from destroyed enemy ships, but the planets remained untouched, civilians safe, and the evacuation fleet unscathed. The humans had fought. They had destroyed. Yet somehow they had preserved life where no one thought it possible, and across the galaxy the word spread. The humans had arrived. The legends were true, and every commander, every fleet, every world understood one terrifying truth. The humans were powerful, unpredictable, and capable of changing the fate of the war forever. Kalen clenched his fists and whispered again, almost like a prayer, for the sake of everything, keep them out. The stars above the Nibbara system shone silently as if holding their breath, waiting for the next move in a war that had suddenly become far more dangerous and far more hopeful than anyone had ever imagined. The council had debated for days, but now there was no more time. The humans had proven their presence in the Nibbara system, and every report showed the same truth. Their power was unimaginable, their precision deadly, and their sense of honor terrifyingly absolute. If they entered the central war zones, countless worlds would be destroyed. Admiral Kalen paced the command deck of his flagship, the glow of distant stars reflecting off his gray claws. Lyra hovered beside him, her wings trembling slightly. What do we do, Admiral? We can't stop them. Not with words, not with fleets. Nothing works. Kalen stopped and looked at her, the weight of leadership heavy in his eyes. Then we do what must be done. We lure them away. If they leave the war zones, the galaxy might survive. But to do that, we will have to make the ultimate sacrifice, Lyra gasped. You mean you'll lead them into a trap? Kalen nodded. Yes, my fleet will serve as a decoy. The humans will pursue us. Their power will crush the enemy forces along the way, but they will never reach the central conflict. It is the only way. The decision was not easy. Kalen knew what it meant. His fleet, brave but vastly outmatched, would likely be destroyed. Millions of lives would be risked to protect billions, yet he also knew that without action, the humans' arrival could end everything, leaving the galaxy in flames. Captain Marcus of the human fleet, unaware of the plan, received the decoy's signals. He studied the fleet carefully. They are trying to guide us somewhere, he muttered. We'll follow, but we must still protect civilians in neutral zones. Nothing else matters. As Kalen's fleet moved into the hyperspace corridor leading away from the main war, they encountered enemy ambushes. The human fleet engaged immediately, their weapons blazing. Entire armadas vanished into fire and smoke. Planets that had been under siege saw attackers reduced to nothingness in moments. Kalen's fleet kept a careful distance, drawing the humans further and further away from the central war zones. Even as the battle raged, Kalen never lost sight of the cost. One by one his ships were destroyed, hulls cracking, engines exploding. Messages from his captains were filled with courage and determination, each one acknowledging their fate but focusing on the mission. We must protect the galaxy, they transmitted. Do not let the humans reach the heart of the war. We fight for life itself. Lyra fought back tears as she watched the decimation. Admiral, it's too much. Kalen placed a hand on her shoulder. I know, but this is what leadership demands. Sometimes, to protect the future, you must sacrifice the present. These humans, their strength is a force of nature, and like a storm we cannot stop them. We can only guide them and survive in the spaces between. Hours passed. Systems lit up with explosions, fleets shattered, and yet the humans moved onward, precise, careful, and relentless. The decoy plan was working just as Kalen had hoped. Enemy forces were obliterated, but the humans did not stray toward the main war zones. They were being guided by a force they did not understand, a strategy beyond their knowledge, but one that saved countless lives. Finally, as Kalen's flagship prepared for its final engagement, he sent one last message to the Council. Keep the humans out, for the sake of everything. Then the ship plunged into battle, a final stand to ensure the galaxy's survival. Explosions rocked the deck, alarms screamed, and yet Kalen faced the chaos with calm determination. He had fulfilled his duty. He had guided the humans away, and though he might not survive, the galaxy would live. Across the void, Captain Marcus and his fleet continued onward, unaware of the sacrifice that had kept them from turning the Central War into total annihilation. But somewhere in the debris of decimated fleets and shattered planets, the message echoed: humans were powerful, merciful, and unstoppable, but the galaxy had its protectors, those willing to risk everything so life could endure. And for Kalen and his fleet, their sacrifice would become legend. The Valiant sailed through the emptiness of space, its massive engines glowing against the backdrop of stars. Captain Marcus stood on the bridge, his hands resting lightly on the control console, eyes distant as he reviewed the battle reports from the Nibbara system. The humans had fought, destroying enemy fleets but leaving planets untouched. Civilians had survived, yet the true cost of their path was only now becoming clear. Lieutenant Arya approached, her face pale. "Captain, look at these transmissions. The decoy fleet, they didn't survive. Admiral Kalen and his fleet, they sacrificed themselves. They drew us away from the Central War, knowing they wouldn't make it out alive." Marcus's jaw tightened. He sank into his chair, staring at the blinking lights of the communications console. "They did all of this. For us, for the galaxy. And they never asked for anything in return." Arya shook her head slowly. "They knew our power, our capabilities, and they still put themselves in the line of fire. They understood that if we engaged fully, the Central War would have been destroyed." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the realization settle deep in his chest. Humans fought for life, yes, but they also carried a responsibility unlike any other species. They were dangerous not because they sought domination, but because they cared too much. They protected, defended, and destroyed only what threatened the innocent, and sometimes that meant paying the highest price themselves. "Lieutenant," Marcus said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "We are powerful, yes, terrifyingly powerful, but there are things even we cannot control. Courage, sacrifice. Those are not ours alone. The people we just saw, they understood the cost of life in a way that is humbling." Arya looked out at the stars, lost in thought. They saved billions. Without them, everything, the Central War, countless planets, would be gone. And yet they are gone themselves. It doesn't seem fair. Marcus shook his head. "Fairness has nothing to do with leadership, Arya. Sometimes to protect the future, you must make choices the universe will never recognize." They knew this. They chose to stand in the way of chaos, even knowing the cost. He turned to the crew, who watched in silence. "Humans are not the only protectors in this galaxy," he said, voice firm. "There are others, beings who will risk everything to save life. We must honor them by understanding their sacrifices, by learning from them, by making sure that their bravery is not in vain." The crew nodded, hearts heavy but inspired. Across the galaxy, the story of Kalen's fleet would become legend. They were alien, yes, but their courage mirrored the very best of human ideals: selflessness, honor, and the protection of life. Marcus stood again, looking out at the void. "We are dangerous," he whispered. "Yes, but the danger is not in what we destroy. The danger is in what we protect, and how far we are willing to go to keep it safe. Kalen and his fleet showed us that, and we will carry that lesson forward." The Valiant and its fleet changed course, leaving the decoy systems behind and heading towards safer regions of space. The humans had fulfilled their mission without even realizing the full depth of the sacrifice made for them. They fought, they protected, and they inspired. But the galaxy would remember the true heroes, those who had risked everything to keep them out of the war. Marcus sighed, a mixture of sorrow and respect washing over him. "We are not just warriors," he said quietly. "We are guardians. And sometimes the greatest battles are the ones we avoid, the ones we are guided to by courage we may never fully understand." As the stars stretched into streaks of light in hyperspace, the humans sailed onward, carrying the memory of sacrifice and the unspoken promise to honor it. And somewhere in the silence of the universe, the names of Kalen, Lyra, and their fleet echoed quietly, a reminder that courage and selflessness could shape the fate of countless worlds. For the humans, the war had become more than strategy or strength. It had become a lesson in humility, honor, and the profound power of life itself. Months passed, and the war that had once consumed entire star systems finally slowed. The central conflict continued, but now the galaxy breathed with cautious relief. The human fleet had not directly engaged in the core battles, but their presence had shaped the outcome in ways no one could ignore. Entire fleets had been decimated by their pursuit of decoys, giving the Central War a chance to survive. Civilians had lived, planets remained intact, and across the stars, whispers of humanity's power and restraint spread like wildfire. Captain Marcus stood on the bridge of the Valiant, watching distant suns rise over worlds still untouched by war. The memories of the sacrifices he had unknowingly benefited from weighed heavily on him. Admiral Kalen and his fleet, they had led the humans away, knowing they would not survive. Entire civilizations had been spared because of their courage. Lieutenant Arya approached him, quiet and somber. "Captain, the galaxy is talking about them. The aliens who sacrificed everything to keep us out of the war. They call them legends, heroes, guardians of life." Marcus nodded slowly. "They saved billions, and yet their names will be remembered by us and whispered by countless worlds long after the war ends. That is a legacy few could ever dream of leaving." He stepped to the viewing deck, looking out at the sparkling stars. Somewhere in the void, the remnants of Kalen's fleet floated in silence, a graveyard of bravery. And yet through that silence, life endured. The humans had carried forward not just the mission, but the lesson. Strength is nothing without restraint, power nothing without honor. Across the galaxy, alien species began to rebuild. Planets once thought lost were repopulated. Alliances formed where there had been distrust. And everywhere stories of humans spread. Stories not of conquest, not of domination, but of protection, of guardianship. They were feared for their might, yes, but they were revered for their principles. Captain Marcus made a log entry, his voice calm but heavy with reverence. "We are dangerous. We are feared. But the greatest power lies not in what we destroy, but in what we choose to protect." Kalen and his fleet showed us the way. They stood in the path of our power to preserve life, to give the galaxy a chance. Their courage will never be forgotten. Their sacrifice will guide us for generations. On distant planets, children played under the suns, unaware of the horrors that had almost claimed them. On space stations, pilots trained with hope in their hearts, inspired by stories of both humans and aliens who had given everything. Across the galaxy, the idea took hold, that life, every life, was worth fighting for, worth protecting, and sometimes worth sacrificing everything to preserve. For the humans, the lesson was clear. Their battleships were not merely weapons of war. They were symbols of responsibility. They were guardians of hope. Marcus looked at his crew, young and old, seasoned and new, and saw the reflection of those sacrifices in their eyes. "We are more than fighters," he whispered. "We are stewards of life. And as long as we exist, the galaxy will remember that humans do not fight for glory. They fight for everything worth living." Somewhere in the silent stretches of space, Admiral Kalen's sacrifice echoed. The galaxy knew his name, and the humans never forgot the lesson he had taught them without ever meeting them. Courage, honor, restraint, these became the guiding stars of humanity's legacy. And as the Valiant moved onward, the stars shimmering around it, one truth remained clear. The humans were unstoppable. Yes, but in their restraint and morality, they had become the guardians of the galaxy. For the sake of everything, life endured. For the sake of everything, humanity's legend lived on. The galaxy had learned, in awe and in fear, that the greatest battles are sometimes the ones you avoid, and the greatest victories are measured not in destruction, but in the lives you save.